our next speaker, who is a young Irishman, James Whelton, who is based in Dubai, and Corkman, UCC?
No.
Somehow you got away. But James has a very interesting story. He's Irish, a computer coder, venture capital advisor, and he's co-founder of a very interesting company called Coderdojo, which he's going to talk about, which is a network of free computer clubs for children. So it's really very much complements what we've heard earlier. So let me get you set up.
Perfect. Good afternoon. Thank you. I should clarify as well. It's not UCC was actually my first choice in CEO, but I didn't make it to college in the end, much to the horror of my parents. So I've already gone through all that resentment from them in my life. I hope this isn't being streamed. We've heard a lot today about George Boole, Claude Shannon, who they were, what they achieved, the use and application of their work, both in further research and industry. But in a different vein, now that it's 200 and 100 years after their birth, I would like to look at who are going to be the next generation of creators and take a look at Claude Shannon and George Boole's youth, the factors that shaped them and pushed them in the directions, thus pushing them to achieve the things that they did. And then similarly as well, I want to look at it at the context of under the age of 18. Because today we're in a very unique place as a society. We have the first generation of digital natives, so to speak, young people who've known nothing less than high-speed internet and selfie sticks. So I want to take a look at how they are introduced to the work of Shannon and Boole, how they learn it, their application, and then kind of on a wider basis, the societal impact, again, off the back of this unusual time that we're at. So just to introduce myself, I grew up in Cork, just down the road from UCC. I'm a software developer by trade. I co-founded an organization called Coderdojo, which I'll talk about in a sec. Recently, I was CTO of one of the Middle East's largest e-commerce companies, which was acquired last year. At the moment, I'm now working on opportunities in emerging markets. I started making websites and developing, making animations around the age of 9. And computer programming and computers in general have played a pretty substantial part of my life, career to date. So growing up, doing everything from making apps and games to websites to wiring toasters to motherboards to melting motherboards and getting in trouble for melted motherboards and all sorts of things. So I've been an advocate for young people learning programming and how they put it to work. I was first introduced to Boole's work age 12 at UCC. UCC's computer science department under Dr. Sabine Taberta ran a program called Monster Programming Training, a fantastic program that would take in 16 and 17-year-olds and introduce them to some of the fundamentals of computer science, including C programming. They let a very fresh-faced 12-year-old me in, which you can see there. I'm very thankful to UCC for allowing me this opportunity and introducing me to C programming. I'm not thankful for them still hosting this image on Google. So anytime someone Googles my name, they see a 12-year-old me. So there you go. I also have some affiliation to Boston. I lived here for a brief period when I was an EIR with a venture capital firm here. And I should also disclaim at this point, I am not a mathematician, nor an electrical engineer, nor an academic. I loitered around UCC a lot. I've been chased in my early teens. I was chased off UCC's campus by their security for skateboarding. So my relationship with UCC and academia in general is strenuous but intimate. So I kind of want to just kind of talk to you about Coderdojo because this will kind of frame, in general, how young people are learning and being introduced to programming today. So it was founded in 2011 in Cork. This was in response to growing up by the Monster Programming Training course. There was very few outlets for anyone interested in computing. And particularly for me as a young person, I found it very frustrating that there was nowhere I could go to get feedback on the things that I was doing, explore new languages, get more direction. And in my teens, I got known for hacking a certain version of the iPod Nano because I was famously an academic in high school. The general consensus was, well, if that idiot Welton can program, then surely everybody can, which then spawned me teaching about 40 pupils in my school twice a week the basics of making websites and apps and so on. In response, once it became somewhat attainable to do this, a number of other pupils from different schools approached me to teach them, and this kind of led to the inception of Coderdojo. As a movement, it is entirely free, volunteer-based and nonprofit, following a lot of the principles of open source software and free software in terms of how we publish and run our community. The environment is very removed from the classroom. Young people have that 5 days a week. They don't need it on a weekend or evening. It focuses quite a lot on self-led learning, aka getting kids to Google things, peer-led learning as well, and trying to create an evergreen cycle where kids will go on to mentor other kids. And it's very project-orientated. It's not theory intense. We leave that for computer science degrees and third-level education. And in addition to getting them to program, we try and focus on developing soft skills such as teamwork, presentation, and also try and tackle some of the issues we see in, I guess, the IT industry today around diversity and opportunity and access. And the premise of this isn't to create the next Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates or whatever, but more so a generation of creators with a hint of social responsibility and give them a tool set to really empower them in whatever industry they go on to do in life or go on to enter in life. And first session has a very tangible outcome. They might have their first website online or build their first game, and it's language agnostic and diverse. So in the few years that it's been alive, there's now 850 plus clubs across 80 countries. There's about 450,000 young people that do it weekly, and it's had a reach of over 100,000 young people. And we see here we've got Coderojos across Africa. So I don't know, we've seen that how the work of Boole has gone across the Atlantic to Shannon here, which has gone further to what we see now Africa, across Asia. That's an all-girl Coderdojo from Belgium. And then we also have events each year where kids get together, show off their work, kind of as peers, discuss what they're developing. And those type of competitions and events are much more, marks are given for application learning process rather than technical complexity. And generally trying to encourage people or young people to make useful things. So to kind of bring it end to end, I wanted to show you how in Coderdojo and many other organizations, young people first typically really see Boolean algebra and the work of Shannon. And it's not through circuits as many people would have been introduced. They did electrical engineering, or possibly if you're a teenager or a young person who got interested in this whole space before the advent or access of computer programming. But it's normally in one of two ways. On the left-hand side is Scratch, which is a visual programming language actually created by the Lifelong Learning Lab here in MIT's Media Lab, Mitch Resnick, who leads it. And that's very visual. You have a block there that says, if the A key is pressed, A is for alphabet, else if B is pressed, B is for beta, and anything else is, I don't know any other Greek letters. And then similarly, if it's in Coderdojo and they're doing JavaScript, it's demystified in a very simple way of if it's raining, bring a raincoat, and so on. And again, these are the basic principles that goes back to or, and, or not that Boole devised and Shannon implemented when working with relays. So that's kind of an end-to-end and how your typical 9 or 10-year-old will first interact with their work. So as I was researching for this, I saw a number of factors and commonality between the youth of Boole and Shannon, despite being 100 years apart, and then even 100 years later, see it in many of the Coderdojo kids that we work with today. So we've already spoken about this in a bit, but George Boole's background was somewhat modest. His father, a cobbler, skilled tradesman, but not typical that of the background of a mathematician at the time. And very supportive family. He learned Latin from his father and was later tutored by the local bookstore owner, had numerous mentors as well, and as a tinkerer at a young age. So he made his own telescopes, microscopes. He frequented the Mechanics Institute. And as mentioned earlier with Ode to Spring, he self-taught himself Greek and then published this poem translated from Greek to English in the Lincoln Herald. And as said, that afterwards there was a bit of discourse and controversy in the letter section of the Lincoln Herald with disbelief that a 14-year-old could do it. And I think the discourse was something akin to internet commenters today, or trolls. So we know that also he left school at 16 due to his father's failing business, and he went to teach in Doncaster. However, it wasn't mentioned that in those 2 years that he spent there, a past pupil purported that he was very absorbed in his own work, that he had little patience for students who couldn't grasp mathematics. And in fact, I think most telling was he was asked or pushed to leave because it was felt that he taught in a very untraditional and unconventional manner, much to the upset. So 3 defining characteristics that we see here is evident passion for what he did, a support system in the form of mentorship from his father and other people in his community, and then also a degree of an unconventional nature. Similar with Shannon, came from a supportive family, was heavily influenced by Edison and his own grandfather who held the patent on the washing machine. And while Shannon's father, who was a businessman then judge, and his mother was a principal, didn't really have too much of a role in his science and mathematics, I guess how he got started in them, his grandfather pushed him quite a lot. So he showed an early ability in science and mathematics, tinkered around, built model airplanes, RC boat, and stole fencing wire to build a telegraph system to a friend's house half a mile away. Very industrious, and would earn money, pocket money, from repairing radios. And so it was no surprise when he would go on to study electrical engineering and mathematics. So similar, passionate, supportive system around him, and somewhat unconventional. So then, looking at this formula and these 3 factors combined, we take a look at what would lead Shannon to, when Shannon started working with relays, and basically in his paths, mathematical studies, had seen that he could use Boolean algebra to express these circuits. It's kind of interesting to take a look at the steps prior to that, because it was a passion that got Claude Shannon so invested in this. It was a support system that pushed him in this route. And somewhat unconventional that he would draw this parallel, because I bet you his electrical engineering professors didn't really think that Boolean algebra was applicable to circuits at that point. So taking that same formula, we kind of see that similar with young people today. Passion in that technology is omnipresent, more so I guess there's more examples and more widely publicized stories of, I guess, making technology and this space more attractive. Support systems in the form of proliferation and democratization of education, something such as computer programming, which used to be very esoteric, is now widely available. And then unconventional, not that there's something in the water that all these young people are drinking, but more so that we have this digital native generation that are different from all predecessors. So to kind of give an idea of what young people are creating, and I'm going to take a few young people I know personally from Coderdojo in Ireland. This is Niamh. Niamh is 12. And Niamh encountered a situation whereby her father, who had gotten an electric car, and despite the drop in oil, I think we're all still in line with electric cars are the future. He had great difficulty in finding an electric car charging spaces. So she, having attended Coderdojo for a few years and then mentored, decided to make an app that would allow it, that would, based on geolocation, would point a driver to their nearest charging spot, and in addition, identifying if that charging spot was available or in use. So we can see it there running, not just an iPhone, but her web app, which is running on a Tesla car there. Similarly, in a different vein, in rural Ireland, we have Aveen and Padraig here, which if they ever come to America, God help them with Americans pronouncing their name. This is This is, they had a very different experience in that them growing up on a farm, they had a different set of challenges around safety, and particularly there's, you regularly hear horror stories of young lives being lost on the farm due to lack of safety. So they created a site compiling all their knowledge. When a 9-year-old tells you that the slurry pit is no place for a child, you best believe them. Then we have QuickCom, and this is another story. This guy, Connor Begley, started attending Coderdojo, I think 3 or 4 years ago, got interested first in Python before he fell in love with Java, and then branched into hardware. So we see here an Arduino board, and a Raspberry Pi, and a few other pieces. But the only problem that he experienced in life was his aunt, Fiona, who had cerebral palsy but had some limited movement in her eyebrow and forehead. So he was able to build a communication system for her, customized to expressions like wanting Pringles, a cup of tea, or her support of the Liverpool football team. But again, another intimate problem that this 16-year-old was able to spot and solve using his ability. And then 2 more examples. 14-year-old Harvey, who has managed to create a system for locating small children in big public places using beacon technology to triangulate. And Maciek, who has, if any of you computer scientists thought that this was very high in the stack and using high-level languages, well, Maciek made his own computer with a 16-bit bus, which is, I think, sufficiently low-level. So I think the interesting thing about this is, and that's just Ireland as an example, that we know that Shannon had his work on top of Boole, and we know now that all these kids, in a way, have their work on top of Shannon and Boole's work combined. So if you see the problems that these kids are experiencing and the solutions that they're creating, thinking about that at scale, and thinking about that in other continents, if that is in Africa, if that's in Asia, it's quite a powerful thing to think about. As Professor Sullivan talked about earlier, that there's a number of challenges that we're increasingly solving through big data, and the more people we apply to it to solve them, the more we'll progress in society. So the idea of these kids continuing, and whether they get these core skills, and they go to study or work in areas like medicine or civil service or politics or agriculture, will have a drastic effect and be a revolution, if not by just, again, we take a look at developing nations like Africa or parts of Asia, the sets of experiences and issues that they'll grow up with that none of us can empathize with or will probably ever be aware of, will hold profound effects and solutions that they'll be able to bring. In ability, we know, or in addition, we know that Boole never expected his work to be utilized by Shannon in the way that it did. Neither did, when Shannon created his masters, expect his work to go on to the way it did. We know that when transistors came about, which really put Shannon's work on steroids, who knows what these young people are going to go on to create, and if in fact what they do create in a short few years will really accelerate. It is really impossible to know, but it's a really exciting time in that respect because we don't know. And outside of Coderdojo, there's a number of other organizations and channels that these people are learning. You have organizations like Black Girls Code that specifically target Black, African-American, female minorities. You have Code Club, which is tightly associated with the school system. Code Now, who again reaches out to underprivileged communities. Specific groups for females like Rails Girls or Women Who Code. And then even just in publication like HTML for Babies, which I got my godson, Hello Ruby, which demystifies the Ruby language for young people, and then other platforms like Codecademy, which make it very accessible. This proliferation of education resources for this field again, it all culminates in this unpredictability. So it's a very exciting time in that respect. What we do know is that these young people are incredibly passionate. They have great support system in these forums around them. And thank God we're at an unconventional time, which will spell, and again, as I said, the fields that they go into, I think will spell a great change for our society, just like Shannon did bring about off the work of Boole. So I'd like to thank you for your patience and attention, and hope that we all get to senior management positions so that these young people don't overtake us in life. Thank you.
Thank you, James, for that fresh perspective, non-academic perspective, which is very good. Any questions, comments? Yeah.
Hi. I just want to thank you. As an MIT and Harvard grad, I've had the great pleasure of being a mentor for Coderdojo here at Microsoft New England Research and Development, and also down at Google in New York for Black Girls Code. And I just love the fact that you're democratizing, because the kids are they're like little sponges, and getting them, teaching them to program robots or just do basic things in Scratch, it's just really, really remarkable. So I commend you.
Thank you for volunteering. Yeah.
So, James, you've nothing to apologize to UCC for, right? And we'll get you in the end, don't worry. No, I just wanted your comments on, like, up until quite recently, for kids who might have been interested in I mean, we've heard of things, we've heard machine learning and deep learning mentioned today. The possibilities of, some young girl, young guy in their garage now being able to use resources like the star cluster here at MIT, for example, so you get this multi-node, really powerful computing, and it's at your fingertips, and it's not expensive anymore. I mean, can you talk about the implications of that for these young people that you're dealing with day to day?
So I think once they get to that level and under the right mentorship and guidance, so we again, fantastic resources to have and able to use. And Coderdojo, in a sense, and many other organizations are quite young, that these kids are by and large like 16 and 17, and like they might have started 4 years ago, and that's the age. So even as an organization, we're open to a whole lot more change. But again, the results are difficult to predict. What I do see as well is it's going to create I think, taking Ireland, for example, might have more streamlined entries to computer science. So maybe Professor O'Sullivan can comment, but there's, if I remember correctly, in recent years, there's been high issues with dropout in computer science, or students entering not fully aware of what it was.
I suppose up until about 3 or 4 years ago, there was a mismatch between kids' expectations of what, or understanding of what computer science was and what it is. And I think in recent years, certainly in UCC, the retention rate has gone up to where we want it to be, in excess of 90%. But that needed to be proactively managed, because I think when you think about it, of all of the disciplines of all of the subjects that people do at university level, computer science is the one that their understanding is quite mismatched with what the topic actually is. So people know what medicine is, they know what mathematics is. They have all sorts of things that they think computer science might be. So that needs to be made properly. So
then in that respect, you have a child who could potentially be exposed to this sort of at a young age. They go through a system like Coderdojo or whatever will exist in a few years' time, and they get into somewhere like, they enter into computer science in UCC. At that point, it's incredibly powerful because they've been streamlined through that entire process. So even then, maybe looking in several years' time, and again, it's only in recent years that we've seen, there's always in the past, there's been electronic kits for kids and getting them interested in that, but not so much programming courses for young people or as high a level of them. So I think even potentially in the, I don't know, as a feeder to computer science, or maybe also in electrical engineering and mathematics, will have a great effect.
Ask James, how's Coderdojo funded?
So Coderdojo is funded by a number of, as a core foundation, which then affects everything on an international level. It has several key partners like Microsoft, Salesforce, and so on. Individual dojos can have individual supporters, and we would often advise if somebody wants to see Coderdojo affected in their own area that they get involved with that local chapter. And it's kind of one of these wonderful things that one year we run out of funding, then it's bust, but the system is being designed that it doesn't require a central foundation or entity to live. So it really follows that kind of, I guess, decentralized structure, not too different from, I guess, like a number of other organizations. So I guess that's the exciting thing, that where will it be in 40 years, 50 years, how will it have changed?
Okay, if there are no other questions, let's thank James again.